Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Earl.
And I'm Will Garcia.
And together, we're the Hoops Guys. And in continuing our 2014-2015 season previews, we will be discussing the Golden State Warriors today. How'd they do last year, Will?
They did pretty well. They had a decent year. They went 51-31. They were a 6th seed in the Western Conference, which is pretty remarkable. That's like a 3rd seed anywhere else.
True.
They did lose in the first round, but they lost in 7 games to the Clippers, which is another really great team, great series. So it was a pretty bittersweet year, but all in all, they did a pretty good job.
All right. What went well for them?
Well, one thing that's obviously really went well is perimeter shooting. And shooting in general, really. Anytime you have Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson, the ball's going to go into the basket, especially when you throw in a player like David Lee or a really good person who can create for their teammates like Andre Iguodala.
Yep.
So it doesn't come as much of a surprise that this team was 8th in effective field goal percentage, which is just field goal percentage that waits for threes. 10th in the restricted area, which makes sense because Bogut and Lee are both really solid finishers.
Yep.
They were 13th from 3 to 10 feet, 10th from 16 feet to the three-point line, and then, of course, 4th in three-point shooting and 3rd in corner 3 percentage.
In other words, the Splash Brothers moniker is apt.
Yeah, it splashed. If there's any water in here, I would have made a splash noise. Oh, well. Yeah, no, the moniker totally works. You can call them the Super Splash Brothers.
There you go. I like that. Ties it a little bit more to video game culture,
Exactly.
which is nice.
And they're super.
Yes, they are. The other thing that's kind of interesting to note is while they didn't take a lot of shots at the rim, they had generally pretty good shot selection. They were third in the paint for total or true shot attempts, which is another stat in Ian Levy's XPPS stuff over at Nylon Calculus. A must-read for all of you viewers out there.
Absolutely.
They were 7th in mid-range, meaning that they didn't shoot a whole lot of mid-range. They were 5th in above the break threes, and hit those at, I think, 4th in the league in terms of converting those.
Yeah.
And they shot, they were 4th in the league in terms of shooting corner threes. So they took good shots generally, and they made them.
Absolutely. Yeah, this team had no problems putting the ball in the basket.
But that wasn't the only thing that went right. Right, Will? How'd they do defensively?
Yeah, defensively, they were really solid at forcing tough shots. You know, this team gets thought of as an offensive team. I don't think of them that way, though. Anytime you're anchored by a guy like Andrew Bogut and have players like Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala on the wing, you're going to have a great defense. And this team does have a really solid defense. They were 3rd in defensive effective field goal percentage, which means that teams didn't really make shots against them. Good defensive rebounding team. And in terms of expected points per shot, that beautiful stat from Ian Levy, kind of a weird thing to call a stat beautiful, but it is.
It's pretty.
It's pretty gorgeous.
Yes.
No. Yeah, they were 4th in defensive XPPS. Which means that they were forcing the kinds of shots that you want to be forcing.
Yep. And then in terms of the opponent's actual points per shot, they were 4th in that as well. So not only were they forcing tough shots, but they weren't really letting the opponent convert them very well.
Exactly.
And then they also seem to do a pretty good job of preventing ideal shots, which was reflected in that XPPS score. They were 1st in the league in terms of preventing shots near the rim in the restricted area. They forced the 5th most percentage of opponent shots from mid-range.
Absolutely.
They were 4th in preventing corner threes. And they were pretty good in terms of contesting those shots as well. 8th in restricted area field goal percentage for opponents, 9th in the paint field goal percentage for opponents. Those mid-range jumpers that they forced a lot of, they contested them well because they were 8th in defensive field goal percentage there. And then they also defended the above the break three very well as well, finishing 3rd in the league at that.
Absolutely. And everything that we've mentioned so far was contingent on this team lucking out pretty well in terms of health. Stephen Curry, David Lee, Andrew Bogut, to a lesser extent, Andre Iguodala's had some injuries as well. These are all fairly injury-prone players, but all of them played at over 60 games, which is really cool. There weren't many freak injuries happening. Stephen Curry played pretty much the whole year. Bogut played more games than we're used to seeing, and this team really did a good job in terms of, not really did a good job, but this team stayed healthy, which was really nice to be able to see for pretty much a full year.
Oh, yeah. Any particular players stand out to you from last year?
I mean, Stephen Curry.
Yeah.
Stephen Curry. Steph's going to be Steph. He's probably the best shooter I've ever seen. Do you agree with that?
I haven't had the pleasure of seeing Jerry West, who I'm also told was a killer off-the-bounce shooter.
Right.
But in my lifetime, Steph has got to be the best shooter I've seen in terms of breadth of abilities in terms of shooting. I mean, off the catch, on the move, and especially off the dribble. I don't think I've ever seen anybody better.
Speaking of, we've been mentioning nylon calculus a lot, but Tim Sartori out there had a great article on players who do well in spot ups and off the dribble, and looking at the differences you'd see there. Stephen Curry did 48% on spot up 3-pointers, 43% on off of the dribble threes.
Yes.
Off the dribble. And then to be fair, if you look at his off the dribble or his regular 3-point numbers, let me pull it up right quick. That's 42%. So he did better off the dribble than he did overall.
Yeah.
That's nuts. That defies everything we know about shooting.
Yes. It's one of those things, it's one of my pet peeves where a guard will take a somewhat contested deep three off the bounce shot. But with Steph, it's actually somewhat of a really good option.
Yeah. You know the phrase, you give somebody an inch, they take a mile?
Yes.
If you give Steph an inch of space, he takes a mile, and the shot's pretty open for him.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was obviously huge. Andre Iguodala, I can't talk today, had a surprisingly impactful year for this team. Yeah. I know that there's a little bit of discussion because I don't remember the exact post, but it was a fairly analytic heavy post was saying that he was one of the best players in the NBA. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, it comes down to what people value most, and right. As part of my master's that I got, my final project was kind of looking at how player valuation in the NBA is done, and in almost every study I saw, scoring, and more specifically points per game, was the predominant variable in terms of what defined whether a player was valued highly or not in general perception around the league. And Iguodala's never really been a major scorer, and his numbers have gone down recently, and last year with the Warriors they decreased even further, which is partly due to role, but he is very impactful. Defensively, he has a monstrous impact. He's a lot better than people give him credit for offensively. He can hit the three at a decent rate. He's an underrated facilitator within the offense.
Great passer.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily the ideal number one shot creator guy on a team, but as a tertiary option, outstanding.
Oh yeah, great tertiary ball handler.
Exactly. So his impact is really immense.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think it was a great signing. if I'm a Warriors fan, which, you know what, I'll say I'm a Warriors fan. I want to see them do well. I'm very happy that this guy's on my team. Just as a defensive, I think it's really interesting that a team has one of the best wing defenders and one of the best post defenders in Andrew Bogut, and both are excellent team defenders as well. In terms of a defense, having those two players healthy, for one, got to keep them playing, and playing good minutes together, that's a really suffocating defensive sort of synergistic combination.
Very much so.
Yeah. One more player who really, I think, improved his offensive game last year, Draymond Green.
Yes, Draymond.
Love you. As a three-point shooter, he's starting to get into it. He's starting to really grow there. His rookie year, it wasn't falling, but last year he shot 33%. Not great. Way better than 21.
Yeah, he's on the uptick.
Exactly, and that really helps him out, especially as a small ball four, which he played a lot last year. Mostly out of, not maybe mostly, but at least largely out of circumstance, which we'll get into later. It's nice that they have a option that lets them go four out.
Yep.
Cool. So a lot of things went very well for this team, as we've talked about. A couple things didn't go so great, though, Josh.
Yes. So, once again, like we mentioned in our previous Spurs team preview, sometimes it's a contextual thing. So some of these numbers might not necessarily be on the whole bad, but they didn't really get to the line or the rim that much, which somewhat makes sense considering the type of shooters they have and the type of players they have on the roster. But that said, you'd like to see them get more shots at the rim and to get to the line a little bit more. They're kind of middling when it comes to protecting the ball in terms of turnovers. They were 15th in the league, which isn't super bad, but it could be better.
No Jonah Hill.
Yeah, and they didn't really crash the offensive boards particularly well, which is somewhat surprising considering Bogut and Lee are pretty good rebounders. But those issues are kind of one of the things that might be somewhat systematic and just play into the type of players they have on the roster. Defensively, one of the problems is they did allow a lot of shots in the paint, and they gave up a lot of trips to the free throw line. I think just beforehand you were telling me a little bit that Bogut and Lee led the team in fouls per game, which probably isn't too crazy a thing because bigs generally do that.
Go ahead.
But that kind of indicates that maybe they're allowing too much dribble penetration. And that might be something that they want to correct or at least mitigate a little bit going forward.
Exactly. And springing off on that, you mentioned Lee and Bogut leading the team in fouls. That becomes quite a bit of a problem when you look at this this big rotation from last year. It wasn't very good. It wasn't very deep.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. Maurice Spates, he tried. It didn't really work out too well offensively or defensively for him last year. Jermaine O'Neal played well as a good team defender and capable on offense. But really, this team, in terms of minutes at the 4 and 5, just the rotation wasn't very solid.
Yeah. Well, that's why, they experimented a fair amount with Draymond and Harrison playing small ball 4, which, given they didn't really add many bigs this offseason, and the fact that Jermaine has not quite yet come out and said if he's coming back this year or retiring, their depth is definitely a concern up front.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that is going to be a major problem for them. It was a problem for them last year. It's going to be a problem going forward. Where does the rim protection come from?
Yep.
Essentially, where does the defensive anchor when Bogut isn't on the floor? Because, the hard truth of the matter is, even if Andrew Bogut had a relatively healthy year, he still missed quite a few games. 67 for a typical player isn't ideal.
No.
You want more than that.
Well, not for your defensive anchor. I
Right.
think everyone kind of
That's a great year
focuses
for him.
in on Klay, but I think Bogut is actually the second most important player on that entire roster.
Yeah.
Everything that Steph means to their offense, Bogut means to their defense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's going to be interesting to see what they'll be able to do when he's off the court, just not playing, because I think he got about 26 minutes per game last year. So he's only on the floor for about half the game.
Yeah.
And with the injuries that can happen in his injury history, you'd think that they'd want more of an insurance policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, speaking of, the lack of depth addressed in the offseason, who did they add? And who did
Guards.
they lose, Will?
They added a lot of guards. They added Sean Livingston.
I like him.
I like him too. Really solid ball handler. Great in terms of being able to be a good playmaker, being able to really just orchestrate and run the offense. Great defender as well.
Yep.
Can guard. I think he can guard 1 through maybe 3.
Yeah. Well, he was tasked with doing that somewhat with the Nets last year after Brook Lopez went down and they switched to an all-switching lineup. So I think his addition is going to be helpful in terms of he's another guy where you can play him with Steph, and that allows Steph to play a little more off-ball, which, as we can see, he shoots 43% from 3 off the bounce, but 48% from catch and shoot.
Yeah.
So if you have a guy like Sean who can maybe set him up for some catch and shoots, that's somewhat even better. And Livingston has the ability to still defend shooting guards in such a scenario so that you're not, maybe struggling somewhat like with Jared Jack and Monte Ellis beforehand with Steph, where there's some size issues that you might be concerned about defensively.
Yeah, I like that addition. Another addition I really like, Brandon Rush.
Yes, people forgot about him a little bit because he was injured the last year or two, but he's a really good 3-and-D guy when healthy.
Absolutely, and he's the kind of guy where if Klay's on the bench, or maybe Klay goes out for a couple of games, they can do a lot of similar things. Yep. Not saying that Brandon Rush is as good as Klay Thompson, but it's the skill set. It complements very well.
Yeah, the drop off wouldn't be supreme.
Right, it wouldn't be Bogut, Festus, Ezeli, which they also got back this year. And I like Ezeli.
And Festus will help with the rim protection, but he's not going to be the type of team defender that you really want behind a Bogut type, considering how important Bogut is.
Right, but that is going to be helpful for their big rotation, just to have a body.
Yeah.
Because there were times during the year when they were playing Draymond Green at the 5, and that wasn't very awesome.
Yeah.
No disrespect to Draymond. They also added Leandro Barbosa.
The Brazilian blur.
Yeah, is he still going to be that? How old is he now?
He might not be as blurish as before, but he should be a really good combo guard still who can fit well in lineups with either Klay, Curry, or Iguodala. So I think he's a nice role player to have on the bench for this team because he's versatile in terms of how he can fit with those key perimeter guys.
Exactly, and speaking of nice role players to fit on the bench for the team, our dude Aaron Craft.
I love Aaron Craft.
I like
that
Aaron
guy's
Craft
awesome.
too. Yeah, I think it's going to be really nice as a defensive look, just to hound point guards.
Yeah, I hope he stays with the team all season because he's one of those guys that he's just like a tenacious hound dog on defense, and
right.
I think every team could use somebody like that.
Exactly.
So.
No, I like their additions this year. I like all the players. I just don't think that they really addressed their biggest need.
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems that's potential subtraction this year is that, as we mentioned earlier, Jermaine O'Neal hasn't really committed
Right.
On whether he's coming back or retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, he's definitely thought about retiring.
Yeah,
and that would be a huge loss for this team.
Yes. Yeah, and the other main loss that they had was Steve Blake, who is a very good player, but with the additions of Livingston, Barbosa, and Kraft, any losses that you might see from Steve Blake's absence are going to be kind of covered by those guys. So not a major loss per se, given the additions.
Yeah, they made up for the loss of Steve Blake very well.
Yeah.
That big rotation is kind of not perfect yet, though.
Yeah. Considering the number of acquisitions they made, how did that impact your own personal awesome stat that you came up with called possession delta?
Okay, if you're going to call mine awesome, you got to call yours awesome too.
Fine, I will.
Okay, so if you haven't seen the first couple of previews we've done, I came up with a thing I call possession delta, which it's really not as dorky as it sounds. Maybe it is. I don't know. But basically, you look at the... I used... The definition of possession comes from a stat commonly used called true shooting percentage. But they say a possession, it's a attempted field goal, a turnover, or a free throw is 0.44 possessions because you have to count for things like and ones and 3-point, 3-point fouls. So using that, what we find is that this team has a possession surplus coming in with the players they've added of 5.9 compared to the players that they lost. So it'll be interesting to keep tabs on, but that isn't a very big loss, or a very big gain, I should say. So I don't expect anyone to really be taking on a much smaller role. Sean Livingston probably won't be getting quite so many minutes as he did out in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Just because you added Kraft, who might be getting some minutes. Barbosa's still on this team.
Yeah. And he'll be behind Steph.
He's behind Steph and Curry.
Yeah, so
Steph 37 minutes a night, Curry.
Yeah, he was starting in Brooklyn, and he'll be coming off the bench now. So I think most of those possessions are probably going to be from Sean, and that's probably not going to be a big issue because he's going to be switching back to more of a backup role. So
yeah,
and
I think he's okay with that.
Cool.
He seems like a cool guy. I don't think there's going to be too many problems.
I'm super rooting for his career to continue. That injury is still the worst thing I've ever seen. Yeah,
that injury was bad.
Yes.
It has that much this potential, as a player, and everything looks to be going so bright, and then just...
To his credit, he's come back and he's still a hell of a player. Somewhat different, but
no one was expecting that. Player. I wasn't expecting that, but I'm really, really happy for him, and I'm really glad that we're still watching this guy play NBA basketball.
Amen.
Okay, so enough about my supposedly awesome stat.
It is awesome.
Okay, my awesome stat. And on to your awesome stat.
All right, so Will says it's awesome, and so I'll defer with him and say that it's an awesome stat. So what I did for these previews is I was trying to look up kind of how rested a team is over the course of the season compared to their opponents. So I looked at 4 games in 5 days, 3 games in 4 days, and road back-to-backs, and just looked at the difference between all of those and their opponents in those same areas to come up with what I call rest differential. It's somewhat simplistic, but according to Will, awesome, and I'll defer and say it's awesome because Will won't let me say it's not. And it's kind of an easy way to kind of see on the whole over the course of the season how well a team might play in terms of consistency to their best in just related to, how much rest they have. And the Warriors are lucky. They're one of the teams that has a positive rest differential. It's not a big one. It's only 3, but that does mean that in general that they're going to be a little more rested than their opponents over the course of the season, which is only going to benefit them.
Exactly. And especially with a team this injury prone, a team that's relying on ace bandages and sleeves and all that stuff.
Super glue.
No, not they use glue sticks for Steph's ankles.
You're right. Actually, I think it's duct tape. But
duct tape.
But duct tape's awesome, so.
Duct tape is awesome. Yeah. That will be... I think the big takeaway with that isn't necessarily that their schedule is a little above average, is this or that. It's that it's not a really bad schedule.
Yeah.
They didn't get made out like the Cavs. The Cavs had a really rough one.
Negative 21.
Had a pretty rough one too. And the good thing for this Warriors team is that with all of these injury-prone players, they're not going to have that to worry about in addition to a super tight, really congested, grueling schedule.
Yep. So
it's something to definitely keep a note on. We're already really close, in terms of being one of the best offensive teams. And I think that Steve Kerr is only going to make them better. One thing with Mark Jackson, and Mark Jackson did a pretty solid job on this team. It's kind of hard to complain too much about a coach who leads a team to go 51-31, 7 games against the Clippers, one of the best offenses and defenses in the league. But one of the problems that he did have was that he relied on attacking mismatches, and he relied on that a lot, almost to the point where there were other better opportunities that he didn't really go to. So that's going to probably get corrected under Steve Kerr. And then Steve Kerr also mentioned that he wanted to use Bogut more as a post passer. Mm-hmm. And anytime you can get post entry and get ball movement that way, that can really get the defense off balance and get the defense moving here, there, and everywhere. And that will definitely lead to some open looks. And Bogut's a pretty skilled passer, so I think that could work out very well. And then obviously when you're on a team with Curry, Klay, David Lee, Andre Iguodala, there are going to be problems putting the ball in the basket. And if they're adding in Brandon Rush and Barbosa and players like that, the ball is going to go in the hoop. So I think that the offense on this team already was really good, and I think it's only going to get better.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
To further add to that, Kerr has already mentioned before that he's probably going to bring a little bit of elements of the triangle with him, which is also going to mean a little more ball movement and player movement, which should generate easier shots, as well as the addition of Sean Livingston, like we mentioned earlier, might allow for Steph to spend a little bit more time off ball, which can be advantageous for that catch and shoot. Steph in a catch and shoot or Steph against closeout defenders is downright frightening. So
absolutely, yeah. If I'm an opposing team, I am having nightmares over that. Mm-hmm. That is like, that's some scary stuff. So my question for you, Josh, is do you think that Klay Thompson's going to sign an extension? Or are extensions even beneficial to players like Klay who might be thinking about getting the max?
Well, they are beneficial if you're coming off of a rookie scale contract.
Okay.
If you're not, then extensions don't really exist anymore. Players aren't really going to use them. But for Klay, I would not be surprised at all to see him sign an extension, and probably for a pretty significant number. I think the Warriors are smart enough to realize that if Klay gets to the market, they're going to have to match on a max contract. I would think they'd want to head that off just to kind of avoid that problem. That said, it actually probably works to their advantage somewhat if they didn't, because the max available to somebody in an offer sheet from an opposing team is going to be 1 year less, and it's going to be slightly less in terms of annual increases. So overall, it would cost less money to just match a max contract offer sheet that he signs in restricted free agency. But knowing the Warriors and how they want to do things and how strongly they felt about Klay, that they didn't want to include him in any potential Kevin Love trade deals, I think something gets done with Klay signing an extension.
Right on. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Another question for you, and I might chime in on it after you're done, is do you think that the Warriors do anything to shore up their big rotation? And if so, what do you think it looks like?
I think they may... They'd have to. Personally, I think they have to. The question is, what type of player might they be able to get, and what would they necessarily have to give up? If they're able to stay healthy in the early goings of the season, there is a pretty strong, assuming he comes back healthy, defensive big man on the market right now, Emeka Okafor, who didn't want to sign with a team right now because he's still kind of recuperating from his back injury. He wants to be 100%, and he also kind of wants to make sure he goes to a contender. So once he gets healthy, assuming the Warriors have a roster spot and the space to bring him on, Emeka Okafor would be a great addition behind Bogut. In lieu of Okafor, they might want to go after the same type of people we mentioned in the Cavs preview, a Costa Koufos type, a Timofey Mozgov, maybe a John Henson type, someone along those lines. The problem is those guys aren't free agents, so you'd have to give up something, and the question becomes, what are you willing to give up? Would it cost a guy like a Harrison Barnes type or more,
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that those are some definite names to keep your eyes peeled for. One last question for you, and it is, do you think that Steve Kerr begins to give Stephen Curry harder defensive assignments this year? One thing that we noticed last year was that Klay Thompson or Andre Iguodala was usually guarding the opposing team's star player. And if it's a point guard this year, like a Westbrook or like a Chris Paul or like a
Derrick
Kyrie
Rose.
Irving, who do you think's picking him up?
Well, I think part of the reason Steph hasn't really had super strong defensive assignments in recent years are kind of related to a few physical things. For one, his ankle injury. Even when it wasn't injured, it was a big concern that you don't want to re-injure it. So I think they tried to hedge their bets a little bit in that regard by putting Klay or another perimeter defender like Iguodala on particularly quick, tough to defend point guards. Steph also isn't very big in terms of mass. So going against a guy like a Russell Westbrook or a Derrick Rose or a Chris Paul type is a little harder for him than, maybe it is for Klay or Iguodala. That said, I do think Kerr does give Steph a little more defensive responsibility this year. And I think, assuming his ankle is as healthy as it can be, I think Steph will show he's a better defender than people give him credit for. I'm not saying he's going to be great, but I think he's at the very least average. And people also sometimes forget that it's hard in the no hand check rule league right now to stay in front of really good point guards. It's part of the reason why we have kind of this new era of great point guards across the league, because it's really hard to stay in front of them. So I think Steph will do well, and Kerr will give him some more defensive responsibility, but I guarantee you Klay or Iguodala are still going to be the main guys when it comes to defending the Russell Westbrooks, Chris Pauls, and Derrick Roses of the league, trying to prevent Steph from getting banged up too much by those more physical point guards.
Absolutely. Can I take away the final question?
Yeah, I got the final question for you. Will, do you think the Warriors can contend this season for the championship?
Theoretically, yes. If everything goes to plan and they address their big rotation, like you said, if they bring in a Emeka Okafor and or some other rim protector to bring in off the bench, like a defensive anchor type, I don't see why not. The question then becomes, does David Lee stay healthy? Does Andre Iguodala stay healthy? Does Andrew Bogut stay healthy? Does Stephen Curry stay healthy? There are so many health and injury concerns on this roster that a lot of things really have to go right for this team to be able to contend, because they have a lot of players who they have like a good handful of players who are really, really important to this team doing well, and a lot of them are injury prone. So I think that if Steve Kerr has this offense moving the way it can, if they shore up their big rotation, which could very well happen, and if everyone stays healthy, they totally could. Those are a lot of ifs.
Yes.
So if I'm a Warriors fan, I'm excited for this year, but I'm trying to keep my expectations in check.
Yeah.
Because I highly doubt this team wins the championship, just because of how much would have to go into that and how much luck, essentially, how the odds would have to break down.
Yeah.
I'm not liking them. But as a regular season team, and when you say, could this team contend? Contend doesn't necessarily mean win.
Yes.
Contend means have a rational or a reasonable shot at winning. And this team does have a much, much greater chance at winning than even most of the playoff teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I concur.
So, I think this team probably gets home court, might be a top 3 seed.
Maybe.
Is going to play extremely well if healthy, and and barring catastrophic injury. So I think they do contend. I just wouldn't want to say that they will win.
Yeah, I think I agree with most of your points, and I concur that it'll take a lot of luck, especially in regards to health, for them to do so. But I wouldn't be overly shocked if somehow they wound up in the finals.
Exactly.
Assuming health. Like, I wouldn't be flabbergasted, like, oh, clutch the pearls, if they wound up in the finals.
Yeah, they wouldn't be like a Florida to Gulf Coast.
No.
Or Cornell.
Yes.
So yeah, another little segment we've been liking to do here lately is what we call 20, 50, 80. A lot of people like to give their predictions about basketball, and a lot of them are crazy talk. So by what we do is we give a 20% likely prediction, a 50% likely prediction, and an 80% likely prediction. So that way we can kind of go off the deep end a little bit, but also talk about things that we think are more likely to happen. So Josh, what are your predictions for this year?
Well, what we just discussed kind of rolls into my 20% prediction. I think it's 20% likely that the Warriors make the finals.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
As we mentioned, there are a lot of things that are probably going to make it tough for that to occur, but given the presence of Bogut as a defensive anchor and Iguodala and Draymond and Klay as really strong defenders, their defense is going to be top-notch, assuming health. And Steph Curry, in my opinion at least, and feel free to drink all the haterade and comment below, people, but I love KD, I love LeBron, but to me I think Steph is the single most dangerous offensive threat in the entire league. The second he steps on the court, he distorts the defense.
You have to guard him to 30 feet.
Yeah, so
You have to guard him to...
I think they definitely have the pieces where if they get the right matchups and they're healthy, it wouldn't be surprising for them to make a long playoff run.
Exactly.
And then my 50% likely prediction is that Steph Curry is in the top 5 in terms of MVP votes this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that either.
And then my 80% likely prediction is that their big depth is going to prevent them from accomplishing my 20% likely prediction.
Yeah, their big depth is probably going to be what stands between them and the finals.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What are your predictions, Will?
My predictions, and we should probably cue some sad music for my 20% one.
Yes.
I only think it's 20% likely that Andrew Bogut plays more than 70 games. Those injuries he's had are just really rough. I think he's gonna really struggle, and he is, like you said, the second most important player on this team, conducive to them winning. I don't like that. Like that.
Well, his style of play, his style of play is really physical too. So,
right.
Most of his injuries have been freak injuries. I wouldn't necessarily say, generally speaking, that he's injury prone in the sense he's got the same type of injury recurring over and over again. But given the past injuries that he's had and the fact that he plays so physical, it's not without reason to think that he's going to miss a fair number of games.
Yep. I think that it's 50% likely that the Warriors sign or trade for a backup big man.
Nice.
And you mentioned Emeka Okafor. I think that's a really great fit, and I think that'd be a great team for him to come to. And he mentioned wanting to go to a contender, and I think he would make them a contender.
I think he would help fill an
them
issue
at least.
they have.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty reasonable, and I think it's 80% likely that Klay Thompson gets offered a max extension.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Considering the uptick in the cap the next couple of seasons, too.
Right, yeah, that TV deal.
A max extension for Klay isn't going to be as bad as it might have otherwise been.
Right. And then looking at the contracts from, like, Chandler Parsons got, Gordon Hayward, he falls right in line with that.
Yeah.
So he's going to get paid.
Yes.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, the question boils down to, is this team going to be good, and how good are they going to be? What are your thoughts, Josh?
They're going to be pretty damn good. If they're healthy, they could be great. If they're not healthy, they should still at least be a pretty good regular season and be entertaining as a league pass option. But if they can stay healthy, they can be really, really, really good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is a team where if they can stay healthy, with the coaching change, with maybe some new additions, even like a guy like Okafor getting brought in, this is a contending team. And even if not, like you mentioned, this is a team that bare minimum playoff lock with injuries.
Yeah.
Unless it's like Steph or Andrew Bogut for more than half of the season.
Yeah.
But is definitely going to be fighting for, and I'd put a little bit of money on them. I'm not encouraging gambling, but I'd say, I'd have a friendly, non-monetary bet that they wind up with home court in the playoffs. This is a really solid team. So I think that wraps it up. This has been our 2014-15 Warriors team preview. Feel free to leave a like if you liked it, a dislike if you didn't like it, comment below maybe on what you think about the Warriors or ideas for future team previews. And if you like this video and you want to see more team previews, feel free to hit that subscribe button. So I think that wraps it up. Josh, do you have any final words?
Go Warriors. Those should be fun to watch. And thanks for watching.
Absolutely. It's been a blast, guys. You have a good one.
Take care.
Bye.